In the second part of this video, we illustrate techniques for orchestrating productive class discussions, including comments and questions the teacher poses and the reasons for her choices. Whereas the teacher's planning activity is carried out in advance before the lessons begin, her actions in conducting the class discussions take place during the lesson. She continually makes moment-by-moment decisions in action throughout the class discussions. For this reason, it is essential that the teacher develops well-thought-out techniques for orchestrating the discussions, and that these are based on sound underlying rationale. These are some issues for consideration. Who does the teacher call on and why? How does the teacher engage everyone in the class discussion? What kinds of questions or comments might the teacher use to find out if students are making sense of others' thinking and reasoning? In the process of discussing these issues, we demonstrate both that and how the discussion makes it possible for everyone to move forward. We have selected a brief excerpt from a whole class discussion and analyze it segment by segment to show how the teacher addresses these issues by being deliberate in her remarks and questions. The entire excerpt comprised about 5 to 7 minutes of the lesson. The example we use comes from the first part of the structuring numbers sequence, becoming efficient at reading the rack. The specific activity the class is engaged in comes early in the sequence. Each child has an arithmetic rack for this activity. The teacher projects the configuration shown here on the screen and says, "Make yours look like mine." She also says, "Try to figure out how many people are on the bus without counting. See if you can use the colors of the beads to help you figure out how many people are on the bus." These additional remarks are deliberate. They emphasize the goal of this activity, which is to use the color groupings of the beads to figure it out. The teacher allows time for students to complete the task, but before calling on anyone, she says, "Please raise your hand if you need more time to figure out the number of people on the bus." In this way, the teacher lets the children know that she will give them sufficient time to solve the problem. This approach differs from traditional instruction, where the teacher typically calls on students to respond within 5 to 10 seconds of posing a question or problem. Here, the teacher does not pose questions and tasks that students are expected to already know the answers to. Rather, students are expected to figure out the answers to questions or to solve the tasks in ways that make sense to them personally. That means they need sufficient time to do so. The dialogue continues as the teacher asks, "How many people are on the bus?" Roberto, 15. Sammy, 14. Tanisha, 15. Marco, 15. Paris, 15. Carla, 15. Notice that the teacher calls on a number of students to give their answer, but does not yet ask them to explain how they figured it out. Her rationale for doing so is that she wants to get some idea of the range of answers. After all, she has no idea what the students figured out. Further, doing so gives the students an opportunity to think about others' answers as well. Now the teacher has to decide who to call on to explain how they figured it out. In this case, the teacher calls on Sammy. "Sammy, how did you figure out 14? He replies with, "I saw 7 on top and I counted. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And the teacher says, "Does anyone have a question or comment for Sammy?" There are several points of significance in this brief exchange. Why did the teacher call on Sammy? After all, he had the wrong answer, but that is precisely the reason she called on him. Notice that the teacher does not engage Sammy in a conversation to get him to correct his error. Rather, the teacher opens up the discussion to get everyone involved by asking, "Does anyone have a question or comment for Sammy?" In the approach to instruction we advocate, the teacher's approach is the same when the student has a wrong answer as it is when no mistake is made. Let's see what happened. Another student, Nola, said, "I think there are 8 on top." She then went up to the front of the room to use the teacher's rack, which was projected on the screen for everyone to see, to show Sammy and the class that there are 8 on top. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and she touches the beads one by one as she counts. Sammy recounted the beads and said, "I mean 8. I changed my answer to 15 people on the bus." The teacher's move was effective. Sammy corrected his error, but not at the direction of the teacher. In this way, students come to understand that everyone in the class is responsible not only for their own learning, but also the learning of others. Further, they learn that making errors is acceptable and, in fact, is a normal part of what happens during a math lesson. Others in the class will help them make corrections. This class is about learning, not about being right. The teacher continues to engage students in the class discussion by asking them, "Who figured it out like Sammy? Did anyone have a different way of figuring this out?" These questions shift the discussion away from the children's answers to their solution methods. Each student now has to think about the way he or she solved the problem and compare it to Sammy's way. The dialogue continues with Leon's reply. "I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. To which the teacher responded, "Thank you, Leon." Leon counted to figure this out. Did anyone use the color groupings of the beads to figure this out? We want to emphasize 2 points regarding this exchange. First, in offering his solution, Leon was presumably aware that it was different from Sammy's. He counted all of the beads by ones, whereas Sammy counted on from 8, the 8 beads on the top rod. Even though Leon used a primitive solution method, he was able to notice that it differed from Sammy's. Second, the teacher is aware that some children still need to count by ones, so she thanked Leon. However, she did not spend more time discussing his solution method because the goal of this activity is to develop efficient ways based on the color groupings of the beads to figure it out. Her question, "Did anyone use the color groupings of the beads to figure this out?" shifts the discussion to this emphasis. The dialogue continues. Paris says, "I know that 10 and 5 make 15, and the teacher asks, does anyone have a question or comment for Paris? Notice that the teacher's question here is exactly the same as the question she asked earlier in the dialogue after Sammy gave his solution. Her purpose is to get others involved in the discussion. The most obvious question to ask Paris is, where did the 10 and the 5 come from? It is significant that the teacher refrained from asking this question herself. She did so because she knows that other children in the class are surely wondering the same thing. So instead of asking that question, she invited others to ask questions or make comments so they could make sense of Paris's thinking. And this is exactly what happened. Roberto asked exactly that question. Where did you get the 10 and the 5? And Paris answered it by explaining, I put the 5 red beads on the top with the 5 red beads on the bottom to make 10. I put the 3 white beads on top with the 2 white beads on the bottom to make 5. And she reiterated, I know that 10 and 5 make 15. So the teacher's approach was effective because it resulted in the students independently asking questions and making comments to get more information in order to understand Paris's thinking. The benefit goes well beyond getting the class involved in the discussion. It also helps to establish that the teacher is not the sole mathematical arbiter in this classroom. All of the students can ask questions, call for clarification, or make remarks. In fact, they are not only allowed to, but they are expected to do so. Now that Paris explained how she got the 10 and the 5, the teacher wants to know if others in the class understood her reasoning, to find out what other students understood, and to encourage them to try to make sense of how Paris figured it out. The teacher might ask, can you help us understand how Paris figured this out? Or, what do you understand about what she said? The teacher might ask these questions of the whole class, or she might specifically call on someone by name. In our example, the teacher decided to call on a specific student, Zane. She asked, Zane, can you help us understand how Paris figured this out? What do you understand about what she said? Zane explained, Paris made 10 with the 5 red beads on the top and the 5 red beads on the bottom. She made 5 with the 3 white beads on the top and the 2 white beads on the bottom. She put the 10 red beads together with the 5 white beads to make 15. We know from Zane's explanation that he understood how Paris figured out this task because he explained her thinking in his own words. The dialogue continues as the teacher asks students to compare Paris's way of thinking to Sammy's way. She asks, is Paris's way the same or different from Sammy's way? And Bianca said different. The teacher asks, how are they different? And Bianca explained, Sammy saw 8 on top and counted 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Paris used the 2 5s to get a 10 and put the 10 with the 5 white beads to get 15. The teacher asks, "Does anyone have any comments or questions?" To which Tanisha replies, "I had a different way of figuring it out. I put the 2 5 reds together to get 10, and then I counted the white beads, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. In this brief excerpt, we see that Bianca took up the challenge the teacher posed and explained how the solutions are different. The teacher's next question is less specific. She asks if anyone has any comments or questions. In doing so, the teacher opens the discussion more broadly. Children are free to talk about anything, not only about comparing Harris's and Sammy's solutions. Tanisha uses this opening to talk about her own way of thinking. Many times, students will listen to others' ways of reasoning and think about how theirs is the same or different, then bring that into the class discussion as Tanisha did here, even though the discussion is purportedly about comparing Paris's and Sammy's way of solving the task. Now the teacher has a decision to make. Does she want to go on to another task or spend more time with this one? In this case, the teacher decided to wrap up the discussion of this task and go on to the next task. We remarked earlier that the entire episode discussed here comprised only 5 to 7 minutes of the entire lesson. Yet the detailed analysis we have presented shows how the teacher used a variety of techniques to ensure that the class discussion was productive. We want to make one additional important point about the example we have presented here. The teacher did not call on all of the children to report how they figured out the task, nor did she even call on many of them to do so. The purpose of the class discussion is not to gather up solutions from the children. Rather, it is to focus on specific conceptual aspects that have the potential to advance learning. It is the teacher's responsibility to ensure that the discussions do just that. She is responsible to make sure that the discussions go somewhere. The issues illustrated by the analysis of the dialogue are how the teacher decides who to call on, ways the teacher engages everyone in the discussion, and how the teacher encourages students to try and understand and make sense of other students' thinking and how she knows what they understand. We have not pointed to any one excerpt from the dialogue that demonstrates how the class discussion makes it possible for everyone to advance in their learning. The teacher techniques that contribute to that are those that help to establish that students are expected to listen to each other and attempt to make sense of each other's thinking. Here's what I mean. As students listen to each other and attempt to make sense of what others say, they inevitably interpret what they hear in terms of what they currently understand. And when children hear something that is within or just at the boundaries of their current understandings, they are often able to make sense of it and incorporate that thinking into their own. In this way, through participating in the discussion, even as listeners, students are able to advance to new levels of understanding. Of course, they also have the opportunity to ask any questions they may have. This points to an important difference between the approach to instruction that we advocate and traditional math instruction. In the latter, the teacher is typically the person that brings new ways of thinking and reasoning to the discussion that she then expects the students to make sense of and replicate. But here it is the students that typically bring ways of thinking and reasoning into the discussion that other students may not have thought of on their own. And as the teacher works to ensure that students clarify their thinking for others, she is ensuring that the discussion is advancing everyone's learning. It is in this way that the teacher also makes sure that mathematical ideas, concepts, and ways of reasoning that are on her own agenda become part of the discussion. After all, she can exercise control over which emphases become the focus of the discussion. In the second part of the video, we have presented an example of a class discussion to illustrate the teacher's role in orchestrating effective class discussions, emphasizing the relevance of the teacher's remarks and questions and how they influence the way the discussion evolves. In the process, we have also demonstrated how children's learning advances through participating in the class discussions. Additional remarks about the teacher's role can also be found in the 3 videos that describe the details of the structuring numbers instructional sequence, structuring numbers 1, structuring numbers 2, and structuring numbers 3, where such information is interspersed throughout.